commander of the Galactic Enforcement Division, stared at the data pad with growing frustration. 3 months of raids across the Outer Rim territories, and still no sign of the human smuggler who had been disrupting their carefully maintained trade routes. The commander's forearms moved in agitated patterns as she reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her network of informants. "Another shipment intercepted," muttered her second-in-command lieutenant. The reptilian officer's scales shifted to a darker shade of green, indicating his own mounting irritation. "The humans struck the freight convoy just outside the station, took everything valuable and left the crew unharmed as usual." His mandibles clicked in annoyance. In her 40 years of service to the Galactic Council, she had dealt with countless species and their various criminal elements. The pirates were brutal but predictable. The smugglers were cunning but ultimately motivated by profit alone. Even the notorious Nexus Syndicate followed patterns that experienced officers could anticipate and counter. Humans were different, infuriatingly different. The species had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, after their primitive chemical rockets finally achieved basic faster-than-light travel. Most established civilizations had dismissed them as another backwater species that would eventually find their place in the lower tiers of galactic society. The Council had assigned them mineral extraction rights on a handful of worthless asteroid belts and assumed that would keep them occupied for several generations. They had been wrong. Within 5 years, human engineers had somehow improved upon thousand-year-old mining techniques. Within 8 years, they were outproducing established mining corporations across 3 sectors. And now, just 7 years later, human smugglers were making fools of the galaxy's most sophisticated law enforcement apparatus. "What do we know about their leader?" asked, pulling up the sparse file they had managed to compile. Read from his own data pad. Former military, served in something called the Earth Defense Force during their pre-contact period. Age 34 standard years, no family listed. Operates a ship called the Defiant Dream with a crew of 12 other humans. 12, repeated thoughtfully, against our fleet of 60 vessels. "Perhaps we should request additional support from the Council," suggested. "The battle cruisers are currently patrolling the sector, with their firepower added to our own." "No," primary arms slammed against her command chair. "We will not admit to the Council that a single human ship has outsmarted the entire enforcement division. We have superior technology, superior numbers, and superior experience. These humans are little more than children playing with starships they barely understand." 3,000 light-years away was proving that assessment catastrophically wrong. His fingers danced across the control interface of the Defiant Dream with the fluid precision of someone who had spent half his life in zero-gravity combat situations. Behind him, his crew worked with the same efficient coordination that had once characterized Earth's most elite military units. "Proximity alarm," announced Sarah from the sensor station. Her voice carried the calm professionalism that had come to expect from his former squad mates. "Patrol ship bearing 27 Mark IV. They're running a standard search pattern." Studied the tactical display with the same intensity he had once brought to analyzing enemy positions during the Martian border conflicts. The ship was newer and more heavily armed than the Defiant Dream, but it was following predictable protocols that assumed their quarry would either run or hide. "Time to intercept," he asked. 18 minutes if they maintain current course and speed," replied James from the navigation console. The former Earth Defense Force pilot had adapted to 3-dimensional space combat with the same natural ability that had made him legendary among atmospheric fighter pilots. "Tom, what's the status on our cargo?" called to the engineering section. "Secured and ready for transfer," came the immediate response from Chief Engineer Thomas Park. "The medical supplies are properly shielded, and the refugee families are comfortable in the passenger bay." Nodded, this particular cargo run was personal. The hegemony had been systematically displacing civilian populations from contested border worlds, claiming the territories for military expansion. The Galactic Council's response had been to issue strongly worded diplomatic protests while doing nothing to actually help the refugees. Humans had a different approach to such situations. "All right, people," announced to his crew. "We've got 18 minutes to show our friends why it was a mistake to hunt us in their own territory. Sarah, I need a full tactical analysis of their ship's capabilities." James, plot me 3 different escape vectors, each one taking us through a different navigation hazard that will test their piloting skills. Tom, give me everything the engines can handle without permanently damaging our warp core. Interrupted Dr. Lisa from the medical bay. We have 43 refugees aboard this ship, including 16 children. Are you certain this is the course of action? Turned to face the ship's medical officer, who also happened to be his younger sister. She had volunteered for this mission despite having a comfortable position at the New Geneva Medical Center, motivated by the same sense of duty that had driven to leave behind his promising career in Earth's Stellar Defense Command. Lisa, those families trusted us to get them to safety, he said quietly. Though we'll execute them as enemy collaborators if they're captured, and though we'll hand them over to maintain their precious diplomatic protocols. We're their only hope. Then we'd better make sure we don't get caught, Lisa replied, returning to her patients with renewed determination. Smiled at his sister's response. It was exactly the kind of attitude that had made humans such an unexpected force in galactic affairs. Where other species saw insurmountable odds, humans saw interesting challenges. Where others calculated acceptable losses, humans found ways to save everyone. Contact in 15 minutes, Sarah reported. They're increasing speed. I think they've detected our thermal signature. Perfect, said, settling into his command chair. That means they're confident. Confident enemies make mistakes. The patrol ship GES Righteous Pursuit represented the pinnacle of Council military engineering. Its captain, Commander, had served with distinction in 3 different border conflicts and had never failed to apprehend a smuggling vessel once detected. His crew of 26 specialists represented the finest training that galactic civilization could provide. None of that prepared them for what happened next. The human ship didn't run. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the Righteous Pursuit while broadcasting what appeared to be a standard surrender signal. Commander ordered his crew to prepare boarding protocols, already composing the commendation report he would submit to Fleet Command. Sir, his tactical officer announced with obvious confusion, the human vessel is. Sir, they're launching some kind of projectile. Torpedo, demanded, reaching for the emergency alert controls. Negative, sir, the object appears to be a cargo container. For a moment, wondered if the humans were attempting to bribe him with whatever contraband they were carrying. Such tactics were not unknown among the more primitive criminal organizations, though they rarely worked against properly trained council officers. Then the container exploded. Not into fragments of metal and debris, as might be expected from a cargo hold breach, but into a brilliant cloud of reflective particles that immediately began interfering with the Righteous Pursuit's sensor arrays. Within seconds, their ability to track the human ship had been reduced to virtually nothing. Emergency sensors to maximum gain, ordered, fighting down a growing sense of unease. Deploy backup tracking protocols, and someone explained to me how they managed to blind our systems with a simple chaff deployment. Sir, this isn't standard chaff, his science officer reported after running quick analysis scans. These particles are composed of some kind of adaptive metamaterial. They're actively adjusting their reflective properties to counter our sensor frequencies. Before could fully process this information, his ship lurched violently to starboard as something impacted their port shields. Warning lights flashed across multiple control stations as his crew scrambled to determine what had hit them. Report, snapped. Something struck our shield generators, the engineering officer called out. Minimal damage, but the impact signature is unusual. Through the swirling cloud of sensor-disrupting particles, the Defiant Dream had somehow managed to launch a precision strike against the one system that would force the ship to lower its defenses. The humans had used kinetic projectiles, simple metal slugs accelerated to tremendous velocity, to damage the shield emitters without triggering the automated defense systems that were designed to stop energy weapons and guided missiles. It was a tactic that no civilized species would have considered, because it required the kind of precise targeting and timing that should have been impossible without sophisticated sensor guidance. Yet somehow, the humans had managed it while flying blind through their own chaff cloud. Sir, the human ship has disappeared from our scopes entirely, the tactical officer reported. They're gone. Commander stared at his status displays in growing disbelief. In less than 4 minutes, a primitive human vessel had managed to neutralize his ship's primary advantages and escape without firing a single recognizable weapon. They had used tactics that violated every accepted principle of space combat, yet those tactics had been devastatingly effective. For the first time in his military career, began to wonder if the Galactic Council had seriously underestimated humanity's potential for warfare. 2 hours later, the Defiant Dream dropped out of warp drive in the Sanctuary system, a remote star cluster that existed outside Council jurisdiction, guided his ship toward the modest space station that served as a waypoint for refugees fleeing various conflicts across the galaxy. The station administrator, a elderly named, greeted the arriving families with the same gentle efficiency he had shown to thousands of displaced persons over the years. As the refugees disembarked, several of them stopped to thank and his crew in their native languages. "You continue to amaze me, Captain," said as they watched the last family disappear into the station's temporary housing sections. "That makes over 300 people you have brought to safety in the past 6 months." "It's not enough," replied, watching a young child cling to her mother's hand as they explored their new temporary home. "For every family we save, there are dozens more who don't make it out." "Perhaps," agreed, "but you are accomplishing more than entire council fleets. The Enforcement Division grows increasingly frustrated with their inability to stop your operations." Turned to study the old administrator. Despite his advanced age, his eyes held the sharp intelligence that had once made him a respected diplomat before he chose this quieter life of helping others. "You hear things," observed. "I hear many things," confirmed, "including rumors that Commander has requested permission to deploy battle cruisers against your ship. The Council appears to be taking your activities quite seriously." "Good," said with a slight smile. "Maybe if we make enough noise, they'll finally start paying attention to what's actually happening in the outer territories." As the Defiant Dream prepared to depart for another mission, neither nor could have imagined that their conversation was being monitored by interests far more dangerous than the Galactic Enforcement Division. Council chambers rarely witnessed the kind of tension that filled the air as representatives from 37 different species gathered for an emergency session. High Counselor, whose people had founded the Galactic Council over 2 ago, observed the assembled delegates with growing concern. In all her centuries of service, she had never seen such agitation over what should have been a minor enforcement matter. "The situation has become unacceptable," declared Ambassador Prime, his massive form looming over the speaker's platform. The reptilian warlord's hide bore witness to countless battles, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This human smuggler has disrupted 17 military supply convoys in the past month. Our expansion operations in the Outer Rim have been delayed by 6 weeks. Perhaps the hegemony should reconsider its policy of forcible displacement," suggested Ambassador of the Republic. Her melodious voice carried subtle harmonics that indicated diplomatic disapproval. "The refugee crisis in contested territories has grown beyond acceptable parameters." Prime's eyes flashed dangerously. "The expand according to ancient right. Weak species yield territory to strong species. This is natural law." "Natural law does not appear to include human behavior," observed Counselor with dry humor. "Commander's reports indicate that a single human vessel has successfully evaded 60 Enforcement Division ships for over 4 months." "They are criminals." Prime slammed a clawed fist against the speaker's platform, causing several smaller delegates to flinch. "They steal supplies, harbor fugitives, and openly defy Council authority. I demand immediate military action." "Military action against whom, exactly?" asked Ambassador of the Confederation. His blue-skinned features remained diplomatically neutral, but his tone suggested skepticism. "Earth's government has consistently any knowledge of this activities. According to their representatives, he resigned from their military 7 years ago and has operated independently since then." "A convenient fiction," Prime growled. "All humans are soldiers. Their entire species thinks like warriors." "That seems rather broad generalization," noted. "Human civilian populations appear quite peaceful. Their agricultural colonies have established excellent trade relationships with neighboring systems." "Surface appearances," Prime insisted. "I have studied their military history. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary period in constant warfare. They have perfected violence to a degree that even experienced soldiers find disturbing. Counselor accessed the relevant files on her personal data pad. Human military records made for fascinating reading, though she suspected that most council members had never bothered to examine them in detail. The species had somehow managed to fight continuous wars for thousands of years without completely destroying themselves, which was unusual enough to warrant attention from specialists. Their per-contact conflicts were indeed numerous, she acknowledged. However, integration protocols indicated that they had achieved global peace before developing faster-than-light travel. Standard civilization assessment suggested they had moved beyond their aggressive phase. Assessment was wrong, Prime declared flatly. Humans do not abandon warfare, they simply redirect it. Before anyone could respond to this claim, the Chamber's communication system announced an incoming priority transmission from Enforcement Division headquarters. Commander's image appeared on the central display, her four arms moving in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. Honored counselors, she began without preamble, I must report that the situation has escalated beyond our current capabilities. 3 hours ago, the human vessel Defiant Dream engaged a full enforcement battle group in the Vega system. A collective murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled delegates. Battle groups consisted of 6 heavily armed vessels designed to suppress major criminal organizations. No single ship should have been able to threaten such a force. What was the outcome? Counselor asked, though she suspected the answer would not be encouraging. The humans disabled 4 of our ships and forced the remaining 2 to retreat, reported with obvious professional embarrassment. Casualties were minimal, but our Tactical Analysis Division has classified their combat performance as unprecedented. Prime leaned forward with renewed interest. Explain. The human ship approached our battle formation while transmitting surrender signals, continued. When our vessels moved to surround them, they suddenly accelerated beyond their listed maximum velocity and began deploying weapons that our tactical computers could not identify. Unknown weapons technology? Asked Ambassador sharply. Military doctrine placed heavy emphasis on technological superiority, and the possibility of humans possessing advanced weaponry was deeply concerning. Not advanced, Ambassador. Primitive. The humans used kinetic projectiles, electromagnetic pulse charges, and what our science division has identified as modified mining explosives. None of these weapons should have been effective against Council military shields. Then how did they succeed? Asked. His mandibles clicked in a pattern that indicated professional confusion. They used them in combinations that violated established tactical doctrine. Instead of attempting to penetrate our shields directly, they targeted our sensor arrays and communication systems. They disabled our ability to coordinate defensive responses, then attacked individual ships with focused kinetic bombardments that overloaded specific shield generators. Prime's scaled features shifted into what might have been approval. Clever, they fought like but with greater precision. The engagement lasted 11 minutes, continued. Our ships never managed to achieve target lock on their vessel. They seemed to anticipate our tactical responses before we implemented them. Counselor reviewed the battle recordings that accompanied his report. The human ship moved through space with an aggressiveness that seemed almost reckless, yet every maneuver served multiple tactical purposes. They had transformed a surrender scenario into a devastating attack by using their enemy's expectations against them. Recommendations, she asked. I formally request permission to deploy capital ships, replied. Battle cruisers with overlapping fire zones and independent targeting systems. The humans cannot evade concentrated firepower from multiple directions simultaneously, said Counselor after exchanging glances with her fellow council members. Capital ship deployment requires unanimous council approval, and several members object to using such force against a single vessel. Then what do you suggest? Asked with barely concealed frustration. We will consider alternative approaches, the High Counselor replied diplomatically. Continue your current operations, but avoid direct confrontation until further notice. As the transmission ended, Prime rose from his seat with ominous purpose. The Council refuses to act decisively. Very well, the hegemony will handle this human problem through our own methods. Ambassador, warned, the hegemony is bound by Council jurisdiction protocols. You cannot take independent military action against Earth citizens without proper authorization. Operates outside Council territory, Prime replied with careful precision. In disputed regions where expansion rights take precedence. If he chooses to interfere with our operations in such areas, he becomes a legitimate target under ancient territorial law. With that ominous declaration, the massive delegate departed the chamber, leaving behind an atmosphere of growing unease. Meanwhile, in the remote system, was discovering that his actions had attracted attention from far more dangerous enemies than the Galactic Enforcement Division. The Defiant Dream hung in space near an asteroid mining facility, watching his crew load medical supplies and emergency rations that would be desperately needed by refugee populations in 3 different systems. Dr. Lisa called from her medical station. We're receiving a distress signal from the New Hebrides colony. Forces have begun pacification operations in civilian sectors. Studied the incoming data with growing anger. New Hebrides was home to over 40,000 colonists, mostly families who had established agricultural communities on what had previously been considered worthless frontier territory. The colony's crime rate was virtually non-existent. Their trade relationships with neighboring systems were excellent, and they had never posed any threat to expansion interests. How many civilians are we talking about? He asked. Preliminary reports indicate mass evacuations are already, Lisa replied. But they are jamming communication signals and intercepting evacuation vessels. Thousands of people are trapped. James, plot a course for New Hebrides, ordered. Best possible speed. Interrupted Chief Engineer Thomas Park from the engine room. Our warp core is still running hot from the last engagement. We need at least 6 hours of time before attempting another long-range jump. We don't have 6 hours, replied grimly. Lisa, how many medical personnel do we have aboard? Just myself and 2 field medics, she answered. Why? Because we're about to find out how many people we can fit on this ship. Sarah looked up from her sensor station with obvious concern. They have deployed a full invasion fleet. We're talking about 3 heavy cruisers and at least a dozen support vessels. Even if we manage to reach New Hebrides, there's no way we can evacuate everyone before they arrive. Stared at the tactical display for a long moment, considering options that would have seemed impossible to anyone trained in conventional space warfare. The fleet was larger, more heavily armed, and operating under the assumption that no single vessel would dare to challenge their military superiority. They were about to learn that assumptions could be deadly. Tom, I need everything the engines can give us, announced. Sarah, start scanning for every piece of debris, every asteroid, and every navigation hazard between here and New Hebrides. James, plot me an approach vector that takes us through the most dangerous space possible. Most dangerous, James repeated with obvious confusion. They expect us to try to avoid them, explained. They'll position their ships to intercept conventional escape routes, so we're going to take an unconventional route. As the Defiant Dream began accelerating toward New Hebrides, none of its crew could have imagined that their rescue mission was about to trigger the largest space battle in galactic history. In the command center of the flagship Conquest of Worlds, Fleet Commander reviewed deployment reports with satisfaction. His 3 heavy cruisers had assumed orbital positions that would allow complete control of New Hebrides' evacuation routes. Any vessel attempting to reach the colony would be detected long before achieving orbit. Commander, his tactical officer reported, long-range sensors are detecting an approaching vessel. Configuration matches the human smuggler ship that has been disrupting our supply lines. Its reptilian features shifted into an expression of predatory anticipation. He had served in 17 different campaigns and had never failed to crush opposition to expansion. The idea that a single human vessel would dare to challenge his entire fleet struck him as either admirably brave or completely insane. Excellent, he growled. Today we will demonstrate to the galaxy what happens to those who interfere with operations. What Fleet Commander didn't realize was that it spent the past 3 hours studying every battle record from every conflict that had ever fought. He had identified 17 different tactical patterns that commanders used consistently, along with the specific weaknesses that those patterns created. They were about to receive an education in why human military doctrine placed such heavy emphasis on adaptability and creative thinking. As the two forces approached each other across the void of space, observers throughout the galaxy began to realize that this confrontation would determine far more than the fate of one small colony. It would establish whether humanity had earned its place as a force to be respected. The defiant dream dropped out of warp drive at the edge of the New Hebrides system like a predator emerging from tall grass. Studied the tactical display with the cold calculation that had once made him Earth's most effective special operations commander. 3 heavy cruisers hung in orbital formation around the agricultural colony, their massive forms bristling with enough firepower to level continents. "Jesus," whispered James from the pilot's seat, "those things are each 10 times our size." "Size isn't everything," replied, his fingers dancing across the tactical interface. "Sarah, give me detailed scans of their formation. I need to know their blind spots, their communication patterns, and their escape vectors." Dr. Lisa interrupted from the medical bay. "I'm receiving emergency transmissions from the surface. They have begun bombing civilian evacuation centers. We have multiple casualty reports coming in." Felt the familiar cold fury that had driven him through 3 years of combat operations during Earth's colonial wars. They weren't just conquering territory. They were deliberately targeting civilians to break resistance morale. It was exactly the kind of warfare that human military doctrine was designed to counter. "Tom, what's our status on those modifications?" Called to the engineering section. "Mining charges are rigged to your specifications," Chief Engineer Thomas Park replied. "But if those calculations are off by even a few percentage points, we're going to turn ourselves into cosmic debris." "Then let's make sure the calculations are perfect," said with a slight smile. "Sarah, I need you to paint me a target." Sarah's sensor array began tracking the lead vessel with unprecedented precision. The conquest of worlds was a masterpiece of military engineering, designed to intimidate enemies through sheer size and overwhelming firepower. Its thick armor plating could withstand direct hits from particle cannons, and its shield generators created overlapping defensive fields that made conventional attacks virtually useless. Unfortunately for Fleet Commander, had never been particularly interested in conventional attacks. "Target acquired," Sarah announced. "I'm reading fluctuations in their rear shield array. Looks like they're cycling power to maintain optimal coverage across such a large surface area." "Perfect," replied. "James, take us in, attack vector Delta 7. The defiant dream accelerated toward the fleet while broadcasting what appeared to be a standard surrender signal. To any observer, it looked like the human vessel was preparing to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. The tactical computers aboard the ships registered the approaching craft as a minor threat, not worth the attention of primary weapon systems. They were making a fatal mistake. "Sir," the tactical officer aboard Conquest of Worlds reported to Fleet Commander, "the human vessel is transmitting surrender codes. They appear to be requesting permission to evacuate civilians from the surface." His features twisted into what might have been amusement. "Humans are even more pathetic than intelligence reports suggested. Inform them that surrender will be accepted only after they submit to full boarding and inspection." "Yes, sir," the tactical officer replied, opening communication channels to the approaching human ship. What happened next would be analyzed by military academies for generations to come. Instead of responding to the communication request, the defiant dream suddenly altered course and accelerated to maximum velocity. But rather than attempting to flee, it was racing directly toward the flagship. James pushed the ship's engines beyond their safety parameters, creating a velocity profile that the computers couldn't match with their predictive targeting systems. "Emergency maneuvers," roared as proximity alarms began screaming throughout his ship. "All weapons, target that vessel immediately." The Conquest of Worlds' massive particle cannons swiveled to track the approaching human ship, but had anticipated this response. At the last possible second, the defiant dream rolled beneath the vessel's firing arc while releasing a spread of modified mining charges. The explosives weren't designed to penetrate the flagship's armor. Instead, they were programmed to detonate at precise intervals, creating a series of electromagnetic pulses that temporarily disrupted the ship's shield generators. For exactly 3.7 seconds, the Conquest of Worlds would be vulnerable to kinetic attack. Had timed everything perfectly. As the mining charges exploded in carefully coordinated sequence, the defiant dream completed its role, and fired every projectile weapon it possessed directly into the flagship's rear shield array. Depleted uranium slugs, traveling at tremendous velocity, punched through the momentarily weakened defenses and struck the ship's primary power distribution center. The lights aboard the Conquest of Worlds flickered as backup systems struggled to maintain basic operations. "Status report," demanded as his crew scrambled to assess the damage. "Main power grid is offline," his engineering officer reported. "We're running on emergency backup. Weapons systems are at 30% capacity, and our shield generators will need at least 20 minutes to cycle back to full strength." 20 minutes? His voice carried a note of disbelief. "How is that possible?" "Sir, the humans somehow targeted our primary power couplings with surgical precision. They knew exactly where to hit us to cause maximum system disruption." Meanwhile, the Defiant Dream had used the confusion to establish position between two of the remaining cruisers. The massive warships were trying to bring their weapons to bear, but their own tactical doctrine was working against them. Vessels were designed to fight at long range, using their superior firepower to overwhelm enemies before they could close to effective striking distance. Had deliberately closed to point-blank range, where the ships couldn't use their heavy weapons without risking damage to each other. "James, keep us moving," ordered as enemy fire began to bracket their position. "Stay in their blind spots, make them work for every shot." The Defiant Dream danced between the cruisers like a fighter weaving through enemy formations. James flew with the instinctive skill that had made him legendary among Earth's atmospheric pilots, treating three-dimensional space combat as if it were an extension of aerial dogfighting. "Sarah, target their communication arrays," commanded. "If we can disrupt their coordination, they'll start making mistakes." Sarah's targeting systems locked onto the sensor clusters that allowed the ships to communicate with each other. A series of precisely aimed kinetic strikes destroyed critical components, forcing the enemy vessels to rely on less efficient backup systems. Immediately, the quality of fire coordination began to deteriorate. "They're starting to hit each other with deflected shots," James reported with obvious satisfaction. "Their formation is breaking down." "Excellent," replied. "Now comes the dangerous part. Tom, are those engine modifications ready?" "As ready as they'll ever be," Tom's voice carried from the engineering section. "But if this doesn't work exactly right, we're going to spread ourselves across several light years of space." "Understood. James, I need you to plot a course directly through the center of their formation. Maximum acceleration, minimum time to target." "Through their formation," James repeated. "That's suicide. They'll concentrate all their remaining firepower on us." "Not if we're moving fast enough," replied with the confidence of someone who had pulled off impossible maneuvers before. "Trust me." What was planning violated every established principle of space combat tactics. No vessel was supposed to survive passage through concentrated enemy fire, especially when that fire came from ships designed to destroy targets much larger than the Defiant Dream. But had studied firing patterns for months, and he had identified a critical weakness in their tactical doctrine. Their weapon systems were designed to track and destroy large, slow-moving targets. They had never been optimized to engage small, extremely fast vessels that could alter course unpredictably. The Defiant Dream suddenly accelerated to velocities that should have been impossible for a ship its size. Tom Park had modified their engines using techniques borrowed from Earth's old chemical rocket programs, creating thrust levels that pushed the vessel beyond its theoretical maximum performance. The gunners found themselves trying to target something that was moving too fast for their tracking systems to follow accurately. "Emergency power to all weapon systems," Fleet Commander ordered from his damaged flagship. "Concentrate fire on that human vessel. Destroy it immediately." Particle beams and missile salvos filled the space around the Defiant Dream, creating a deadly maze of energy discharges and explosive projectiles. Any normal pilot would have been vaporized within seconds of entering such a concentration of firepower. James was not a normal pilot. He flew the Defiant Dream through the killing zone with moves that seemed to defy physics. The ship rolled, twisted, and dove through gaps in the enemy fire pattern that existed for milliseconds before disappearing. James anticipated where the next salvo would arrive and was already moving to avoid it before the gunners had finished pulling their triggers. Passing through their formation, Now, James announced as the ship shot between two of the massive cruisers. But wasn't finished. As they emerged from the far side of the formation, he activated the final phase of his plan. "Sarah, launch everything we have at their engine signatures," he ordered. The Defiant Dream released its entire remaining arsenal of kinetic projectiles, all aimed at the exhaust ports of the vessels. The slugs struck home just as the enemy ships were attempting to turn and pursue, causing catastrophic damage to their propulsion systems. One by one, the mighty cruisers found themselves adrift in space, their engines offline and their tactical advantage completely negated. "This is impossible," whispered as he watched his fleet's status displays show critical failures across multiple systems. "No single vessel should be capable of such devastation." His tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of successful campaigns, stared at the sensor readings with obvious shock. "Sir, they didn't just attack us randomly. Every strike was precisely calculated to disable specific systems while avoiding areas that would cause catastrophic destruction. They could have destroyed us completely, but they chose to capture us instead." The implications of this realization sent a chill through the command crew. These humans hadn't just defeated a superior force through luck or desperation. They had demonstrated tactical superiority that suggested a completely different approach to warfare. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." His face appeared on the main display, and was surprised to see calm professionalism rather than triumph or anger. "Fleet Commander," said in carefully measured tones, "your ships are disabled but not destroyed. Your crews are alive and unharmed. You have exactly 1 hour to evacuate all forces from New Hebrides before civilian evacuation begins. Any attempt to interfere with refugee operations will result in the complete destruction of your vessels." "You dare to issue ultimatums to the Empire?" snarled. "I'm offering you a choice," replied calmly. "Withdraw now and preserve your fleet for future operations, or remain and face consequences that will end your military career permanently. The decision is yours." The transmission ended, leaving to contemplate a situation that no commander had ever faced. He had been defeated by a single human vessel using tactics that his military academies had never considered possible. For the first time in his career, Fleet Commander began to wonder if the galaxy had seriously underestimated humanity's potential for warfare. As rescue operations began on New Hebrides, news of the battle spread throughout galactic civilization with unprecedented speed. A single human ship had defeated 3 heavy cruisers without suffering significant damage, demonstrating capabilities that challenged every assumption about relative military strength between species. In the council chambers, emergency sessions were called to address what was rapidly becoming known as the human problem. In military command centers, senior officers began reviewing every battle record they possessed, searching for tactical doctrines that could counter human unconventional warfare. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been in progress for 14 hours, and tempers were beginning to fray. Representatives from 43 different species packed the chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, harmonics, and translator static that reflected the chaos of their debate. High Counselor observed the proceedings with growing alarm. In her centuries of diplomatic service, she had never witnessed such fundamental disagreement about how to handle a single individual. The battle at New Hebrides had changed everything, forcing the Council to confront possibilities they had never seriously considered. "The human vessel demonstrated capabilities that exceed our tactical projections by orders of magnitude," reported Admiral of the Confederation Military Command. His blue-skinned features displayed the grim professionalism that had made him the galaxy's most respected strategic analyst. "Our simulation teams have run the engagement parameters through our most sophisticated combat computers. The probability of success for the human tactics was calculated at less than 0.3%. "Yet they succeeded," observed Ambassador of the Republic. Her melodious voice carried undertones of concern that resonated through the chamber's acoustic systems, "which suggests that our understanding of human capabilities has been fundamentally flawed." Ambassador Prime slammed his massive claws against his speaking platform with enough force to crack the reinforced podium surface. "Understanding is irrelevant. The humans have humiliated our forces and disrupted our expansion operations. They must be eliminated before their example inspires other species to resist authority. Eliminated? Counselor's tone carried sharp reproach. Ambassador, you speak of genocide against an entire species based on the actions of a single vessel. One vessel that defeated 3 of our heavy cruisers, Prime replied with bitter emphasis. If a single human can accomplish such devastation, what might their entire species achieve if they choose to unite for military action? The question hung in the chamber's atmosphere like a toxic cloud. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they contemplated the implications of Prime's observation. If represented typical human capabilities rather than an exceptional individual, then the galaxy's entire balance of power might be built on false assumptions. I have reviewed the tactical recordings from New Hebrides, announced Counselor of the Alliance. Her forearms moved in patterns that indicated deep analytical thought. The human commander demonstrated 3 distinct advantages that our military doctrines have never encountered. First, tactical unpredictability that exceeded our computer's ability to calculate probable responses. Second, technological improvisation that transformed standard equipment into devastating weapons. Third, strategic thinking that anticipated our responses before we had formulated them. You make them sound like military geniuses, scoffed Ambassador of the Confederation. Every species believes their warriors are superior to all others. Reality tends to be more modest. Reality, Counselor replied calmly, is that a single human vessel has accomplished what entire battle fleets have failed to achieve. Perhaps it is time to acknowledge that our assumptions about humanity require revision. Before anyone could respond, the Chamber's communication system announced an incoming priority transmission from Earth's government. The image that appeared on the central display showed President Sarah, a middle-aged human woman whose calm demeanor seemed almost incongruous given the tension surrounding her species. Honored counselors, she began with diplomatic precision, I have called this emergency session to address growing concerns about recent military actions involving human citizens in Council territory. President, Counselor replied formally, we appreciate your government's willingness to discuss this matter. I trust you have information about the activities of and his crew. President paused for a moment, and several delegates noticed that her expression seemed to carry something that might have been pride alongside diplomatic concern. Is no longer affiliated with Earth's military or government, she said carefully. However, I feel obligated to inform the Council that his actions reflect certain characteristics that are common among human military personnel. Characteristics, Prime demanded aggressively. Explain. Human soldiers are trained to accomplish mission objectives regardless of apparent odds, President continued. We teach tactical flexibility, creative problem-solving, and absolute determination to protect civilian populations. These traits are considered fundamental requirements for military service in human culture. The implications of this statement sent a ripple of unease through the assembled delegates. If capabilities were the result of standard human military training rather than exceptional individual talent, then Earth possessed a military potential that no other species had anticipated. How many humans have received such training? Asked Admiral with obvious professional interest. Currently, approximately 47 million humans serve in various military capacities, President replied with matter-of-fact precision. An additional 63 million have completed military service within the past decade and remain subject to emergency recall. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Over 100 million humans had received military training that produced individuals capable of defeating superior forces through tactical innovation and determined execution. You maintain a standing army of 47 million soldiers. Prime's voice carried a note of disbelief. For what purpose? Earth has no enemies that require such massive military preparation. President's expression shifted subtly, revealing something that made several delegates suddenly uncomfortable. Mr. Ambassador, until very recently, Earth believed it had no enemies at all. However, recent events have suggested that certain galactic powers view human civilians as acceptable targets for military aggression. You speak of the operations, Counselor observed. Your government considers refugee assistance to be a military matter. My government considers the deliberate targeting of civilian populations to be a war crime, President replied with steel in her voice. When galactic authorities fail to protect innocent lives, humans have a cultural obligation to provide that protection ourselves. Cultural obligation? Asked with genuine curiosity. Could you elaborate on this concept? For the first time since the transmission began, President smiled. It was not a particularly pleasant expression. Humans have a saying, Ambassador. If you want peace, prepare for war. We have spent our entire history learning that freedom and safety must be earned through strength and vigilance. We do not expect others to provide our security, and we do not abandon those who need our help simply because the odds seem unfavorable. This explains much, Admiral murmured, reviewing tactical data on his personal display. Human military doctrine prioritizes adaptability and individual initiative over standardized procedures. Their commanders are trained to improvise solutions rather than follow predetermined protocols. Exactly, President confirmed. Every human soldier learns to think independently and act decisively when conventional approaches fail. We consider this essential for survival in an unpredictable universe. Prime's reptilian features darkened with growing anger. You admit that your species is inherently militaristic. This confirms intelligence assessments. We are inherently protective, President corrected firmly. There is a significant difference between aggression and defense. Humans will go to extraordinary lengths to protect innocent lives, but we have no interest in conquest or domination. Your has disrupted military operations across 17 systems, Prime accused. This exceeds defensive action. Has rescued over 4,000 civilian refugees from war zones, President replied without hesitation. If your military operations require the displacement of innocent families, then perhaps you should reconsider your strategic objectives. The exchange was interrupted by an urgent communication alert. Commander's image appeared alongside President, her four arms moving in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. Counselors, we have an emergency situation developing in the system, reported. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple human vessels converging on the coordinates where last reported his position. How many vessels? Counselor asked with growing concern. 17 ships, all broadcasting civilian transponder codes, replied. However, their acceleration profiles and formation patterns suggest military coordination. President's smile returned, wider and more concerning than before. Counselors, I should mention that has extensive connections among Earth's veteran community. Many former military personnel have maintained their own spacecraft for personal use. You are saying that human civilians possess military-grade vessels, Prime demanded. I am saying that humans who have completed military service often choose to remain prepared for emergency situations, President replied diplomatically. Recent events have convinced many of them that such preparedness was justified. The tactical implications were staggering. If Earth's civilian population included millions of former military personnel with access to spacecraft, then humanity possessed a military potential that exceeded anything the Council had imagined. More disturbing still, these individuals were apparently willing to take independent action when they believed civilian lives were threatened. President, Counselor said carefully, does your government have any control over these veteran activities? Earth's constitution guarantees freedom of movement and association, President replied. As long as our citizens operate within legal parameters, the government cannot restrict their actions. However, I should note that human legal tradition places the protection of innocent life above most other considerations. You cannot control your own military veterans, Prime's voice carried obvious disbelief. Mr. Ambassador, President said with patient condescension, humans who have served in military forces are considered to have earned the right to make their own decisions about when and how to serve their communities. We trust their judgment because their training and experience have proven their dedication to protecting others. Admiral studied the developing tactical situation with professional alarm. Commander, what is the current disposition of Council forces in the system? 2 enforcement squadrons and a battle group, replied. Total strength, 26 vessels with combined crews of approximately 8,000 personnel. Against 17 human ships with unknown capabilities, the Admiral mused. This could become the largest space engagement in galactic history. It could become a massacre, Prime growled. Forces will not show the restraint that demonstrated at New Hebrides. If these human veterans wish to challenge our military supremacy, they will learn the price of such arrogance. President's expression grew cold. Mr. Ambassador, I would strongly advise against threatening human military veterans. You may find their response educational. As communication signals began flooding in from the system, observers throughout the galaxy realized they were about to witness either the complete destruction of human resistance or a demonstration that would forever change the balance of galactic power. In the depths of space, 17 human vessels approached their rendezvous point with their crews consisting of men and women who had spent decades learning that impossible odds were simply another kind of tactical challenge. The system had become the focal point of galactic attention as ships from across known space converged on coordinates that would determine the future of human-alien relations. Long-range sensors detected vessels belonging to the Confederation, Republic, and even neutral observer ships from species that rarely involved themselves in military conflicts. Stood on the bridge of the Defiant Dream, watching as 17 human vessels took formation around his ship. Each craft bore the scars and modifications that marked them as belonging to Earth's veteran community, former military personnel who had maintained their vessels and their skills despite officially returning to civilian life. Came a familiar voice over the communication system. This is Captain aboard the Relentless Spirit. I've got 12 former Marine pilots with me, and we're ready to show these aliens what happens when they mess with human civilians. Replied with a mixture of warmth and concern, I appreciate you coming, but this isn't your fight. You've got families to think about. Those refugee families you've been rescuing are my concern too, responded firmly. Besides, Sarah told us about the ultimatum. No way we're letting them push around Earth's people. Similar communications came in from the other vessels. The Fortune's Favor, commanded by former Navy Captain David Park. The Iron Will, crewed by ex-Army Rangers who had converted their transport into a surprisingly effective gunship. The Midnight Express, flown by retired Air Force pilots who had never lost their taste for dangerous missions. Each ship represented years of military service and accumulated combat experience. More importantly, each crew had volunteered to face impossible odds because they believed it was the right thing to do. All ships this is, he announced on the fleet communication frequency. I need everyone to understand what we're facing here. Long-range sensors show 43 enemy vessels, including heavy cruisers and council enforcement ships. They outgun us, they outnumber us, and they have every tactical advantage except one. What's that? Asked Captain from the mining vessel turned combat ship. They still think we're going to fight fair, replied with a slight smile. 20 light minutes away, the combined council and fleet waited in battle formation. Fleet commander had requested additional vessels after his humiliating defeat at New Hebrides, and now commanded the largest military force assembled in this region of space in over 50 years. Sir, his tactical officer reported, we're detecting 17 human vessels approaching our position. They appear to be maintaining a standard diplomatic formation. 17 ships against 43, mused. Either these humans are completely insane or they know something we don't. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. His face appeared on the main display, his expression calm and professional. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiant Dream showed no signs of panic or desperation, despite the overwhelming odds his fleet faced. Fleet Commander, began, I'm transmitting a formal request for safe passage through Council territory. My ships are carrying medical supplies and emergency equipment destined for refugee populations in the outer systems. Your request is, replied immediately. You and your crews will surrender immediately and submit to Council authority. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. I see, said thoughtfully. In that case, I have a counter-proposal. You have exactly 10 minutes to withdraw all military vessels from this system before we implement alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements. Features twisted into something resembling amusement. Human, you are outnumbered more than 2-to-1 by vessels that are individually larger and more powerful than anything in your fleet. What possible alternative could you implement? Smile was not reassuring. Commander, has anyone ever explained to you the difference between hunting and warfare? Explain. Hunting assumes your prey will run when threatened, replied calmly. Warfare assumes your enemy will fight back with everything they have. They have spent so long hunting weaker species that you've forgotten what real warfare looks like. Before could respond, proximity alarms began screaming throughout his flagship. His tactical officer stared at his displays with obvious confusion. Sir, the human ships are? Sir, they're accelerating directly toward our formation. All 17 vessels, maximum velocity. Evasive maneuvers, ordered. All ships prepare to repel attack. What happened next redefined every assumption about human tactical doctrine. Instead of attempting to penetrate the enemy formation or engage in long-range combat, the human fleet split into 3 separate groups that approached from different vectors. Each group used different tactics that forced the Council forces to divide their attention among multiple threats. Captain led one group in a series of high-speed passes that seemed designed to draw enemy fire rather than deliver attacks. Her ships moved like atmospheric fighters, rolling and diving through 3-dimensional space with an aggressiveness that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Captain Park's group took a completely different approach, using their ship's mining equipment to deploy clouds of reflective particles that interfered with enemy sensors. Within minutes, the formation was flying blind through a maze of sensor ghosts and false contacts. Meanwhile, led the third group in direct attacks against specific enemy vessels, but their targets were carefully chosen to maximize confusion rather than destruction. They disabled communication arrays, damaged sensor clusters, and destroyed weapon targeting systems while avoiding hits that would cause catastrophic damage. They're not trying to destroy us, his tactical officer reported with obvious bewilderment. Every attack is precisely targeted to disable specific systems. Then what are they trying to accomplish? Demanded. His answer came from an unexpected source. Throughout the engagement, the human ships had been deploying small objects that the sensors had classified as debris from damaged vessels. Too small to be threats, too numerous to track individually, they had been ignored as tactical irrelevancies. The objects were actually sophisticated communication relays that created an invisible network throughout the battlefield. When activated the network, every human ship suddenly had real-time tactical data about every enemy vessel's position, heading, and vulnerability status. The effect was immediate and devastating. Human ships that had been operating independently suddenly began moving with perfect coordination. They anticipated enemy maneuvers before they were implemented, concentrated fire on targets that were already weakened by previous attacks, and avoided defensive responses that hadn't been attempted yet. Impossible, breathed Admiral from his observation vessel at the edge of the system. They've created a distributed tactical intelligence network in the middle of a battle engagement. The processing power required for such coordination should exceed the capabilities of their individual ship computers. What the Admiral didn't understand was that human tactical doctrine placed enormous emphasis on individual initiative and decentralized decision-making. Instead of relying on centralized command computers to analyze and distribute tactical information, each human ship contributed its own analysis to a shared network that grew more effective as more vessels participated. The result was a collective intelligence that could process battlefield information faster than any single command system ever developed. Sir, engineering officer called out as their ship shuddered under another precise attack. They've disabled our primary targeting array. We can't achieve weapon lock on any of their vessels. How? Demanded. Their ships are smaller and less advanced than ours. They shouldn't be able to penetrate our defenses. They're not penetrating our defenses, sir, the officer replied with obvious confusion. They're convincing our own systems to lower them. Somehow, they've managed to transmit false shutdown commands to our shield generators and weapon systems. The truth was even more disturbing than the commander could have imagined. Human engineers had spent the past several hours analyzing the electronic signatures of Council military systems, looking for exploitable weaknesses in their communication protocols. They had discovered that most galactic civilizations relied heavily on standardized frequencies and encryption methods that prioritized compatibility over security. In essence, the galaxy's military forces had been designed to fight each other using familiar, predictable methods. They had never prepared for enemies who approached warfare as a puzzle to be solved rather than a contest to be won through superior force. "Fleet Commander," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving another transmission from the human leader." Appeared on the display again, but now his background showed the tactical plot of the entire engagement. Every council and vessel was clearly marked with damage assessments and vulnerability analyses that should have been impossible for human sensors to obtain. "Commander," said with professional courtesy, "as you can see, your fleet is now completely disabled. Your weapon systems are offline, your communication networks are compromised, and your propulsion systems are operating at less than 30% efficiency. You have two choices." "State them," growled through clenched teeth. "First option, order immediate withdrawal of all military vessels from this system and guarantee safe passage for refugee evacuation operations. In return, we will repair the damage to your ships and provide assistance with emergency systems that may have been affected by our electronic countermeasures." "And the second option?" His expression hardened. "We stop being polite." To emphasize his point, every human vessel in the fleet simultaneously achieved target lock on critical systems throughout the enemy formation. Weapon signatures appeared on tactical displays, indicating that the humans could deliver devastating attacks against engineering sections, life support systems, and command centers simultaneously. The message was clear. If the humans had wanted to destroy the Council fleet, they could have done so at any point during the engagement. "You had the capability to destroy us from the beginning," said slowly, understanding finally dawning on his features. "Commander," replied seriously, "humans don't fight to destroy enemies. We fight to protect the innocent and preserve peace. Your ships contain over 8,000 crew members who have families waiting for them to return home safely. We have no quarrel with those people." "Then what do you want?" "We want the galaxy to understand that humans will not tolerate the deliberate targeting of civilian populations," said firmly. "We want them to end their forced displacement operations and allow refugee families to settle in peace. And we want the Council to acknowledge that humanity deserves a voice in galactic affairs." For a long moment, silence filled the communication channels as leaders throughout the galaxy contemplated the implications of what they had witnessed. A small fleet of human vessels had defeated the largest military force in the region without firing a single shot intended to kill. They had demonstrated tactical superiority, technological innovation, and strategic thinking that exceeded anything galactic civilization had previously encountered. More importantly, they had shown restraint and mercy that revealed a species with the power to dominate but the wisdom to seek peace. "Very well," said finally. "The hegemony will withdraw from this system and reconsider our expansion policies in light of recent developments." "Thank you, Commander," replied. "My engineering teams will begin repairs to your ships immediately." As human vessels moved to assist their former enemies with emergency repairs, observers throughout the galaxy began transmitting reports that would change the course of galactic history. The species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers had revealed capabilities that exceeded the most optimistic projections of human potential. 6 months later, the Galactic Council convened its first session with humanity as a full member species rather than a probationary protectorate. President sat at the High Council table with the same calm dignity she had shown during the crisis. But now, she spoke as the representative of a civilization that had earned its place through demonstrated competence. "The human delegation submits a proposal for galactic refugee protection protocols," she announced to the assembled representatives. "These measures will ensure that civilian populations receive appropriate protection during territorial disputes, regardless of their species or political affiliation." "The Council recognizes Earth's proposal," Counselor replied formally. "Given humanity's recent demonstration of commitment to civilian protection, we anticipate widespread support for these measures." Ambassador Prime, whose attitude toward humans had considerable revision, added his own endorsement. "The hegemony supports these protocols. Recent events have clarified our understanding of appropriate military conduct." As the council session continued, sat in the observation gallery alongside his crew members and fellow veterans. They had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had forced an entire civilization to acknowledge their worth through demonstrated capability rather than inherited status. "Think it'll stick?" asked, watching the diplomatic proceedings with professional interest. "It'll stick," replied confidently. "The galaxy learned something important about humans. We're not conquerors or destroyers. We're protectors, but we're very, very good at what we do." Dr. Lisa looked up from a medical report she was reviewing. "The refugee resettlement programs are ahead of schedule. Over 40,000 families have been relocated to safe territories in the past month." "That's what matters," said, watching as council delegates debated the finer points of civilian protection protocols. "Every family that finds safety is worth all the risks we took." As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, President approached the gallery where and his people were seated. "Captain," she said with a slight smile, "the Council has formally requested that Earth establish a galactic protection service to oversee refugee assistance and civilian evacuation operations. I don't suppose you'd be interested in commanding such an organization." Looked around at his crew, the men and women who had risked everything to protect innocent lives, and saw the same determination in their eyes that had carried them through impossible odds. "Ma'am," he said with military precision, "it would be an honor." The galaxy had indeed learned too late that every human was a fighter. But they had also learned something far more important. Humans fought not to dominate, but to protect. And in a universe filled with species that sought power for its own sake, that distinction made all the difference. As news of humanity's new role spread throughout galactic civilization, peaceful species began to breathe easier knowing that someone was finally willing to stand between them and those who would do them harm. The age of human protection had begun. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humans decided that enough was enough. And in the shadows of space, the Nexus Syndicate began implementing plans that would test whether one exceptional human commander represented an anomaly, or whether he was a representative sample of his species' true capabilities. In galactic civilization, in the shadow of a distant moon, a ship belonging to the Nexus Syndicate recorded every word.